Your house is making you poor. The math nobody shows you. There's a guy I know named Marcus. He's 58. He spent his entire adult life doing everything right. Bought a house at 29. Paid it off in 22 years. Upgraded twice along the way. His current house in a suburb outside Columbus is worth $640,000, and he owns it outright. Zero mortgage. Not a dollar owed. When Marcus talks about retirement, he points at the house. That's my nest egg, he says. That's 30 years of hard work right there. Here's what Marcus doesn't know. He's going to retire broke. Not broke like homeless. Broke like working part-time at Costco at 68 to cover his property taxes while sitting on $640,000 worth of an asset he can't eat, can't spend, and won't sell because he's lived there for 26 years and his kids grew up in that house. Marcus isn't stupid. Marcus is the victim of the most successful financial myth in American history. The idea that your house is your retirement plan. And I'm going to show you exactly why that myth is destroying the financial futures of tens of millions of Americans. How the math actually works versus how it's sold to you. And what you need to do differently starting today. Because the gap between what people believe about home ownership and what the numbers actually say is so wide you could park Marcus's paid-off house inside it. My name is Tom. I spend way too much time studying how money actually accumulates versus how financial media tells you it accumulates. If you've ever felt confused about whether you're building real wealth or just building a nicer place to live, hit subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. What I'm about to show you is something most financial advisors won't say out loud because the entire mortgage industry depends on you never doing this math. Let me start with a story from 1925 that has nothing to do with houses, but I promise it will. In the 1920s, Florida went through one of the most spectacular real estate bubbles in American history. Land speculators convinced ordinary Americans that Florida was the future. Sunshine, orange groves, a growing population. Buy a piece of Florida land today and you'll be rich tomorrow. The pitch was irresistible. You weren't buying something speculative. You were buying land. Real, physical, tangible land. Something you could point at. Something that felt safe in a way stocks never quite did. Ordinary middle-class families from Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania liquidated their savings, borrowed money, and bought Florida real estate. Prices doubled, then doubled again. People were flipping land contracts before the ink was dry, making fortunes on paper. It wasn't gambling. It was investing in something real. Then in 1926, a hurricane hit Florida. Not a metaphorical hurricane, an actual hurricane. The storm exposed the infrastructure problems, the overbuilding, the fraud in the land surveys. Prices collapsed. By 1927, most Florida land was essentially worthless. The people who had put their life savings into what felt like the safest asset on earth, physical land you could stand on, were ruined. Here's the lesson nobody took from that story. There is no asset so tangible, so real, so American feeling that it automatically becomes a sound financial decision. And the emotional feeling of safety that comes from owning something you can touch. That feeling is not the same as financial security. They are completely different things that most people treat as identical. Now fast forward to 2026. The asset people are betting their retirements on isn't Florida swampland. It's their primary residence. And the story has the same psychological architecture. Something physical, something real, something that feels safe, something that historically went up in value. Something the entire banking and real estate system is designed to funnel you toward from the moment you get your first real paycheck. But here's the thing nobody explains at the closing table. A paid-off house generates zero cash flow. Zero. Your $640,000 house doesn't deposit anything into your checking account every month. It doesn't pay your grocery bill. It doesn't cover your property taxes or your insurance or the new roof you're going to need every 20 years. It just sits there, appreciating at roughly 4% per year on average, while you pay to maintain it and hope someone eventually buys it for more than you paid. That's not a retirement strategy. That's a deferred transaction. And here's the math that should be shown to every 30-year-old the moment they start thinking about buying a home. The average American home appreciates at roughly 4% per year, historically. That sounds decent until you compare it to literally anything else. The S&P 500 has returned an average of 10% annually for the last 50 years. Inflation adjusted, that drops to about 7%. We're talking about a 3 percentage point annual gap. And 3 percentage points compounded over 30 years isn't a minor inconvenience. It's the mathematical difference between retiring with freedom and retiring with panic. Here are the actual numbers. Take $100,000. Put it into a house. At 4% average annual appreciation, after 30 years, you've got approximately $324,000 in asset value. But you also paid property taxes every year. Call it $3,000 annually for a modest home, which is $90,000 over 30 years. You paid for maintenance at roughly 1% of home value per year. Another $90,000. You paid homeowners insurance, another $45,000. Add those carrying costs up and subtract from your appreciation, and the net gain on your $100,000 house investment over 30 years is roughly $99,000. Just barely break even in real terms before you even account for inflation. Now take that same $100,000 and put it in an S&P 500 index fund. At 7% inflation-adjusted returns, after 30 years, you have approximately $761,000. No maintenance costs, no property taxes, no insurance premiums, fully liquid, generating dividends continuously whether you're sleeping or watching Netflix. You can withdraw from it gradually, exactly as needed, in retirement. The difference between $99,000 in net home equity and $761,000 in liquid invested wealth isn't a rounding error. It's the difference between Marcus and the person Marcus assumes is just lucky. But here's where the psychology gets interesting. Because most people hear this math and immediately push back with the same objection. But I have to live somewhere. I'd be paying rent anyway. And that's true, you do have to live somewhere. But that objection is missing the actual question. The question isn't whether to have housing costs. The question is whether your primary residence should also be your primary wealth-building vehicle. Because if you're pouring every extra dollar into paying off your mortgage faster, if you're skipping 401k contributions to build equity, if you're using home equity as a substitute for an actual investment portfolio, you are making a mathematical error that compounds silently for decades and then reveals itself all at once when you need income and you have none. This is exactly how you become Marcus at 58. House rich, cash poor, trapped. Let me walk you through the mechanism step by step because I want you to understand not just the math, but the psychological trap that locks people in at every stage. The first stage is the down payment drain. The average American home costs about $420,000. A 20% down payment is $84,000. Most people spend years, sometimes close to a decade, scraping together that down payment. Every dollar that went toward that fund was a dollar not invested. At 10% returns, $84,000 invested at age 25 becomes approximately $1.5 million by 65. But it went into the down payment instead. And in the house at 4% appreciation, that same capital is worth about $275,000 in 40 years. The decision to save for a down payment rather than invest cost a potential $1.2 million in wealth accumulation. That is not an exaggeration. That is arithmetic. The second stage is the ongoing opportunity cost of equity. Every extra mortgage payment you make, every dollar you throw at principal beyond the minimum, you're choosing to store money in an illiquid asset compounding at 4% instead of a liquid asset that could compound at 7 to 10%. It feels responsible. It feels like the discipline you're supposed to have. But disciplined behavior applied to the wrong strategy produces confident poverty. The third stage is the wealth illusion. This is the most psychologically dangerous stage. Your house goes up in value. Your net worth on paper looks impressive. You feel wealthy. You talk about it at dinner parties. But that wealth is inaccessible. You can't spend home equity to pay a medical bill without taking on a home equity loan at 7% interest. You can't withdraw from it gradually the way you would an investment account. It's locked up, and the only ways to access it all involve either selling the house you live in, which disrupts your entire life, or borrowing against it at a cost. The asset you spent 30 years building has made you feel rich and left you financially paralyzed at the exact moment you need liquidity. Now, let me tell you about a guy named Gary, because Gary makes this concrete in a way spreadsheets alone can't. Gary is 63. He's got a house worth $580,000 paid off. On paper, Gary is worth more than $500,000. In reality, Gary's retirement account has $95,000 in it. Using the 4% withdrawal rule, the standard formula designed to make your money last 30 years, that $95,000 generates $3,800 per year from investments. Add Social Security at roughly $22,000 annually, and Gary is living on about $25,800 per year total. But Gary's house costs him $14,000 a year just in property taxes, insurance, and maintenance. That leaves $11,800 per year for food, utilities, transportation, and healthcare. That is $983 per month for everything else. Gary worked for 35 years. Gary drove a modest car. Gary fixed things himself to save money. Gary did every single thing the culture told him to do. And Gary is going to spend his retirement calculating the cost of things before he puts them in his cart. Because Gary built a house instead of a portfolio, and a house cannot pay you. Now, before I give you the framework for fixing this, I need to address the structural force that's making this problem invisible to most people. Because this isn't just about individual decisions. It's about a system that is incentivized to keep you confused. The mortgage industry originates trillions of dollars in loans per year. Real estate agents collect billions in commissions. Property tax revenue funds local governments. The entire financial infrastructure of middle-class America is built around the assumption that you will buy a home, pay it off slowly, and treat that equity as your primary form of accumulated wealth. Every institution in that chain, the bank, the realtor, the government, the local tax assessor, benefits when you do. None of them benefit when you run the comparison math against a basic index fund. So the comparison math doesn't get run. It doesn't get taught. It doesn't come up at the closing table. This is financial warfare by omission, not a conspiracy. Just aligned incentives pointing in a direction that is profitable for every institution and expensive for you over a 30-year horizon. And here is the macro context that makes this even more urgent in 2026. The three pillars that made the house as retirement plan work for the previous generation, the employer pension, fully funded Social Security, and low healthcare costs, are all degrading simultaneously. The pension is gone for most private sector workers. Social Security's trust fund is projected to be depleted in 2033, triggering an automatic 23% benefit cut by federal law. Healthcare costs for a retired couple now run $12,000 to $15,000 annually at a minimum and rising faster than general inflation. Gary's generation got away with the house strategy because the government covered the gaps. The generation retiring in the next 20 years is not getting those same guarantees, which means the only wealth that is going to matter in retirement is the wealth you built yourself, in liquid, investable form. And every dollar you poured into the house instead of the portfolio is a dollar that cannot help you now. Here is the framework. 6 steps. These are not theory. This is the actual behavioral sequence that separates the people who retire, with options from the people who retire, with a Zillow page and a fixed income that doesn't cover their property taxes. Step 1. Calculate your actual housing cost every single year, including every line item. Most people think about the mortgage payment. They don't think about property taxes, insurance, HOA fees if applicable, maintenance at 1% of home value annually, opportunity cost of the equity sitting in the home, and the 5 to 6% transaction cost you'll pay when you eventually sell. Add all of those up. Compare it to what you'd pay in rent for a comparable place in your market. The gap is almost always smaller than people assume, and in many expensive markets, the math currently favors renting and investing the difference. Step 2. Never stop funding your retirement accounts while carrying a mortgage. These are not competing priorities where one wins and one loses. They coexist. If you have an employer 401k match, that match is a 50% to 100% instant return on your contribution. No mortgage paydown strategy on earth beats a 100% instant return. Hit the match minimum every single month, every single year, without exception. Then fund a Roth IRA, then and only then consider extra mortgage payments. The sequence matters more than the amounts. Step 3, build toward the portfolio number that generates your retirement income, not the net worth number that makes you feel good. The formula is simple. Take your expected annual expenses in retirement and multiply by 25. That is your target portfolio. If you need $70,000 per year, you need $1.75 million in liquid invested assets. Your house does not count unless you are genuinely planning to sell it and rent in retirement. Most people aren't. So build toward the real number. Step 4, treat home equity as an emergency backstop, not an investment vehicle. It is good to have. It provides optionality in genuine emergencies. But it should not be the plan. The plan is the portfolio. The equity is the backup. Step 5, stress test your retirement number with honest inflation math. The $70,000 annual income that feels comfortable today will feel like $47,000 in 20 years at 2% average inflation and closer to $39,000 if inflation runs at 3%. The portfolio target has to be large enough to support inflation-adjusted withdrawals across a 25 to 30-year retirement. Most people's mental number is anchored to today's dollars and will fall short by a decade. Step 6. When you have an extra dollar, run the comparison before deciding where it goes. At a current 30-year mortgage rate of roughly 6.5%, paying down the mortgage saves you 6.5% per year on that dollar. Investing the same dollar in the market historically returns 7 to 10% per year. That is not an obvious win for the mortgage in most scenarios. Your instinct says pay down the debt because debt feels dangerous. Your instinct is optimizing for psychological comfort, not mathematical outcome. Run the numbers first, then decide. Here's the broader point I need to leave you with. The culture around homeownership was built during a specific economic era, an era of high inflation that made long-term debt cheap, an era when the stock market was harder to access for ordinary people, an era when the pension was real and Social Security was fully funded and healthcare was affordable. That era closed somewhere around 1990. The rules that worked for your parents are a financial trap for you. The people who retire with genuine financial freedom in 2026 and beyond are not the ones with the biggest equity in the nicest house. They are the ones who figured out early that there are two different games, the housing game and the wealth game, and that playing only one of them while ignoring the other is how you end up like Gary. Your house is where you live. Your portfolio is how you retire. These are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. And the financial system that benefits from you confusing them has never had any incentive to explain the difference. Now you know. The question is what you do with it. Subscribe if this reframed how you think about your own situation. Drop a comment and tell me, are you treating your house as part of your retirement plan right now? Or have you already separated the two? Because someone watching this is exactly where Marcus was at 38, and there is still time. The math doesn't care how late you are starting. It only cares that you start. The house is not the plan. Build the plan.